Hello, you find me today at the Grand Junction Arms in Bulbourne. This is on the Grand Union Canal on the Tring summit, and today what we're going to do is we are going to head towards the Wendover Arm and have a little look at that. This, I hope, is going to form part of a multi-part series where I walk the whole length of the Wendover Arm. I should just address its name. It is known as the Wendover Canal nowadays, although technically speaking that's incorrect. The canal builders called branch canals arms, although I guess if the definition of the name of something is what everybody calls it, then it is the Wendover Canal. Now then, to understand why this was built and what it is, it's worth just having a think about where we are and what this is. This is Bulbourne. It's on the Tring summit of the Grand Union Canal, and if you think about what I mean by summit, if you go that way, then there are locks going down and down and down all the way through Berkhamsted and through Hemel Hempstead and Watford, all the way down to London, where it eventually meets the Thames in West London at Brentford. And if you go this way, you also have locks that are going down and down and down all the way through Leighton Buzzard to a very long pound at Milton Keynes. So what we have got here is a summit. It is a bit of canal which is high up, and it doesn't have, unlike a river, a flow. Obviously a river wouldn't flow up a hill and down the other side, but a canal goes where it needs to. By the way, just while we're here, these are the old workshops for British Waterways and then Canal and River Trust. They've been sold off to become luxury houses, which is extremely understandable. That's basically what happens if you don't fund canals properly. I hope you're listening, government. The next thing to go will be the canals themselves. However, let's get back to this summit. This summit needs water, and lots of it. Every time a boat goes off the summit down either end, it takes a lot of water with it. I think somebody calculated that it's 900 cubic meters of water that is lost per boat, which is a lot of water. And if you were a canal builder in the 1790s, when this canal was planned and built, then you needed to find a lot of water from somewhere, and there are a few different possible options that you could go for. One option, which happens a lot in the system, is to pump water back up the hill. So that happens here. You'll find various pumping stations pumping water back up to the top, but obviously that's expensive and it's an ongoing cost. You've got to use probably steam engines, so you're talking fuel, and later on you're talking diesel and or electricity. Option number 2 is to find a local river and use the local river to flow into the canal, and that's where the Wendover Arm comes in. It was planned as an unnavigable feeder to the town of Wendover, where there were some springs, and actually when they built it in sort of 1790s, late 1790s, they reckoned it would be pretty much the same price to make it navigable, and so they did. Unfortunately, the amount of water supplied by the springs was not enough, and so they built a number of, they repurposed one reservoir and built 3 more, and reservoirs being great big stores of water which you could store up during the winter months when it's rainy and use during the summer months when it is not. And so for about 100 years from 1797 to 1897, that was the situation. Unfortunately, there was an issue, which is that the Wendover Canal leaked, and it leaked big time. The canal building technology at the time was essentially to use puddling, which is a type of clay, and it is a type of clay which requires to remain wet, and to remain wet whilst you, underwater, whilst you flow water through it, and that results in the channel being waterproof. Unfortunately for the Wendover Arm, that was not in fact the case. Now, I'm just going to overtake these lovely people. Hello.
Hi.
Hello there. And then we'll carry on talking about the Wendover Arm. By the way, before we carry on talking about the Wendover Arm, I said this was a summit. This is in fact the end of a summit, and you can see there Marsworth Top Lock, which takes the canal down, I think 7 locks on its journey towards Leighton Buzzard, Sheddington and then Leighton Buzzard. You can see the locks used to be doubled up, I think, or possibly this is a purpose-built thing, but that is a dry dock, so it's a sort of another lock chamber to the right of the locks, and you can empty all the water out of it, and then you can maintain boats. There are around here a lot of really very nice working boats from the heyday of the canal system. You can see they're not built out of steel, they're built out of wood, some of them, or composite, i.e. steel sides and wooden bottoms. In any case, really nice place to come for a walk. Now then, let's get back to the Wendover Arm. So it leaked, and it leaked a lot, and it got to the point where it was frankly leaking more water out of the Grand Union summit than it was providing. Here we go, let's start down the arm. And so in 1897 they actually put planks across the canal at very near the place that we're going to walk to, when I finish walking to anyway, and that pretty much ended the use of the canal as a means of transport. In fact, the canal was used, broadly speaking, for 4 different things. It carried coal to some gasworks. I think there were 3 gasworks down here. It carried straw and horse manure back out again. Presumably someone had a use for it. There was a flour mill built in 1875, which we're going to pass. And there was also a boatyard where they built boats right up to the 1940s, I want to say, maybe 50s. In any case, sadly, only one boat built at that boatyard still survives, but it is preserved down in Rickmansworth, and it's well worth going to have a look. Worth having a look at this chunk of canal. It is navigable. It is not deep. So realistically speaking, if you're going to bring your boat down here, you're going to be going 2 miles an hour maximum. Now, you may be wondering, why am I walking down here and not bringing my boat bringing my boat down here? And the answer is, you'll find out in a bit, but just at this moment in time it wouldn't be a terribly wise idea. So, as I was saying, leaking. They tried loads of different solutions to stop it leaking. They relined some of it with concrete. That sort of worked, but it's wildly expensive and you can't do the whole thing. They relined some of it with asphalt, which was an interesting idea and an interesting experiment. It didn't work, only lasted 13 years. That was sort of due to the technology of the time, and sort of due to the fact that asphalt is basically not a brilliant thing to put at the bottom of a whole bunch of water which is going to freeze in the winter and crack it all apart. Eventually they built a stop lock at a place called Little Tring, which was there to essentially stop the water flowing out of the canal in the summer and allow the water to flow into the canal in the winter. But that didn't work. They also installed various pumping engines, one at White Houses and one indeed at Little Tring, to pump water out of the reservoirs and into the feeder channel and therefore into the Summit Pound, and they worked. One of them is still working today. It's got an electric pump in it, having had a couple of steam engines, then a diesel engine, and now an electric pump. But ultimately the canal was closed for navigation, firstly in 1904 and then finally in 1912. And one of the nice things about this canal is that because this is quite rural, the channel wasn't filled in, wasn't obliterated, it wasn't built over. That's not to say it survived intact. They laid pipes down various chunks of the canal bed to carry the water still, so culverted it. They lowered the water in various chunks of it, and it being the early 20th century, they filled quite a lot of it with rubbish. However, that might have been that, but in the late 1970s, interest began in the idea of restoring it. And I've walked down parts of the Buckingham Arm in one of the other videos, and that has, its challenges. It's got houses built on the canal bed and all the rest of it, and that one didn't officially close until 1963. This one closed in 1912. But this acts really as a guide, a beacon of how to do canal restoration, because the Wendover Arm Trust, as was now Wendover Canal Trust, have done the most astonishing job with volunteers and people who aren't paid and people who just do it because they want to on the weekends, literally getting their hands dirty, digging out chunks of rubbish, removing plants and trees which have grown in the intervening 100 years, relining it with a thing called bentonite, which is a modern sort of matte substance which holds water a lot better, and bringing it back to life. And that's what we're going to go and have a look at today. So this first video, we're just going to walk along the first mile or so of the canal, mile and a half of the canal, which is the bit that always was in water. Excuse me. And we're going to go and have a look at the very beginnings of the restoration project, which will eventually take it all the way, the 6 miles, all the way to Wendover. Again, point out this is still currently navigable. I mentioned that I wouldn't be able to take my boat down it for the moment, and that's because they've hit a bit of a snag. Apparently at the very end of the bit that they've just restored, there is some water leakage going on, and that requires investigation. Oh, there might be some water leakage going on. It's a little bit unclear. And that's the situation at the moment. So you can take your boat down here, but you basically can't turn it round at the end. And I don't fancy reversing all the way back again. Now, when I first had a boat in the early 2000s, that was pretty much the situation. And absolutely nobody came down here except for a few very hardy explorers. And what happened was there was a winding hole sort of a quarter mile before the end. You had to wind, and if you really, really wanted to get to the end, you had to reverse up to the end of the last quarter mile, which, by the way, I have done. But that's not something I fancy doing on me Todd. So, I might shut up for a bit, you'll be glad to know, and we'll break out the jazz. Now, I mentioned that there was a flour mill down here, and in fact what I should have said is that there is a flour mill down here, still exists. So, having climbed over this stile, we will cross over the canal on this road bridge, trying not to get ourselves killed or run over. The towpath continues on the other side. Here is the flour mill. Until 1964, it still carried flour by boat. Since then, obviously it's carried by lorry. Now then, this is the wharf where Haygates used to unload or load their flour onto boats and have it go down the Grand Union Canal. And as I say, until I was in my late 20s, whatever, this pretty much represented the head of navigation. But due to the brilliant efforts of the Wendover Canal Trust, Wendover Arm Trust as was, that is no longer the case. You can see, by the way, if you look at the water, that is beautifully clear and very undisturbed, and that is for a reason, which is that very, very few boats still come down here. Now that will change in the future. In the meantime, you have this sort of slightly curiously industrial scene in the middle of an incredibly rural canal. As we walk around the corner, you'll be able to see the silos where they store the flour. When I was younger, this was more or less a graveyard of abandoned boats, burnt out boats that were towed out here and left to die. But they've all been cleared up, which is rather marvellous. Now, right next door to the flour mill, there was a boatyard, sadly long since gone and replaced by housing, but you can still see the wharf here, which used to belong to the boatyard, and where lots and lots of boats were launched from, including some pretty chunky ones. I saw mentioned somewhere of a 450 horsepower tugboat that was used to pull great trains of barges down the Grand Union Canal in its heyday. Right, might be time for me to shut up again and break out some more jazz. Ah, this is worth knowing. So here is the path to the first of our reservoirs, Tringford Reservoir, and if you have a look here, you can see there is a sluice, and I think the idea is that we should be able to feed the canal from the reservoir, although to be honest this looks like a overflow from the canal out of the canal towards the reservoir. I believe, in fact, the water gets pumped up from the reservoir at Tringford Pumping Station, which we will come across in a bit. Sorry to keep on banging on about when I was a lad, but when I first started boating, this bit here is the winding hole. It's not much of a winding hole, is it? But it is a winding hole, and if you wanted to get to the end of the canal, you had to put your nose into there and then reverse out backwards, and all the rest of this chunk That's about a quarter of a mile. You had to go backwards down it, otherwise you'd never stand a chance of turning around at the end. By the way, it's another feeder into the arm there. It's provided a little bit more water. So these water solutions, they used all of them, lots and lots of different solutions to try and get some water into the summit. And back to the jazz. And now we approach Tringford Pumping Station and the stop lock. So Tringford Pumping Station was a later addition. Originally there was a pumping station at Whitehouses, and then they put in one here, and then they put in a second steam engine, and then they closed the one at Whitehouses, and then they took out the steam engines and put in diesel engines, and then they took out the diesel engines and put in electric motors. Now, you can see, if you have a look here, there's quite a lot of pumping going on, quite a lot of water addition. This is the building. The roof was lowered when they took out the steam engines, I think they were Bolton and Watt steam engines, and put in diesel engines. But this is the original, at least foundations of the building, and it is still adding water to the summit today. And then, in order to sort of facilitate the stopping of water leakage, they built this stop lock. Now, it has to be said that this stop lock is currently stopped because of the need to work out if and where this leakage is coming from. But until 2001, this was the end of the canal. So you can see there's absolutely nowhere to turn around at all. So you would have had to reverse down all that bit we just walked from the flour mill. Now, the stop lock is in a slightly ruinous state, but it is still there. And as you can see, they've drained this section, but you can still see the gates that are still here, albeit long since buried in silt and in a somewhat ruinous state. Here is the chunk of lock, and at this end you can see where the gates used to be. I don't know what they're going to do with this, whether they're going to restore the lock or just leave it, but rather excitingly we get to see the canal bed of completely new restored canal. And it's not just new restored canal, because coming up ahead there is what looks for all the world like an original canal bridge, and indeed it is built to the original pattern. However, in 1973 County Council decided it was too much effort to maintain the bridge, and they just clobbered it, filled in the canal. And it was one of the early successes of the then Wendover Arm Trust that they managed to raise the money to have what is actually a modern bridge clad in brick to look like the original bridge. And you can see it slightly skew whiff, which is original. You can see it slightly on the tilt, which is original, which is rather brilliant. In fact, if you go and have a look, you can see that there is a plaque. Hold on, let's go that way. From the Inland Waterways Association. I don't know if you can see it or not because my camera is a bit odd, but 2001, it was reopened, and then 2005 this chunk of canal was reopened, admittedly currently closed. However, it is worth a look to go down and have a look at what they've done around the corner, because they've done something rather excellent, which I think is thoroughly to be applauded. Let's go and take a look. So coming around this corner, what you see is a blooming great big winding hole where there's loads of room to wind and go back the other way. No need to reverse, up chunks of canal. Absolutely brilliant. And this has been open since 2005, I think. In any case, it is to be thoroughly applauded. And this is near the end of where this video will stop for today, and we'll pick it up in a future video when we walk along the next chunk of canal. And as you can see, coming around the corner, canal looks for all the world like it's going to carry on, but there is a bunt in place, and in fact they use this next section for storing all their equipment and so on. So whilst you could physically get through, it'd be quite poor form to essentially trespass on the Wendover Canal Trust's property. Well, it's not technically their property, but you know what I mean. However, you can see it is pretty nearly ready to go. I walk across the bunt, you can see there's not a great deal needs to be done to get it ready, which is absolutely brilliant. One day soon you'll be able to carry on even further along this remarkable stretch of canal restored by a remarkable group of people. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you. This is being filmed very shortly before Christmas. I will see you in the new year. See you next time. Oh, just before I go, I always forget to say this. Please do subscribe and like and so on. It really helps me to grow the channel and to make more videos like this. Thank you very much. Goodbye.